Hello, everyone. Oh, goodness. Oh, there it goes. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the number one liquid-fueled, liquid lubricated show on the interwebs. This is the Whiskey Musings Broadcast. And I am going to apologize ahead of time. Not my fault. My ISP apparently decided to crap the bed. And even now, I'm not 100% back because I can't get into YouTube or Facebook right now. I'm pretty sure I am streaming there, but I can't see it. And therefore, because I can't see it, I can't chat with you guys either. So unfortunately, the only place that seems to be working. Oh, wait. Facebook may have popped up on me. Not that YouTube really matters. I don't really care, but Facebook and everything else, it's just so apparently what happened, just for you, somewhat technical folks. All of a sudden we lost, DNS. Now, DNS is domain name services. And essentially what it is, just for a quick description, it's basically the phone book of the internet. So when you type something into your browser, say facebook.com as an example, your computer reaches out to that phone book and will find the internet protocol or IP address of where to point your browser to go fetch the information. And unfortunately, the DNS servers dropped, apparently, or something. And they're still having problems because I'm having issues getting places. They're only about halfway up. So I'm hoping that I can stay connected. But the only place that I can actually see chats right now is over on Rumble. So Rumble is working. So if you're over on Facebook and you want to chat with me, head on over to Rumble and get on the chat over there. I know this isn't like a plug, a specific plug. This pretty much, again, it happened about an hour before I came on, and I tried to do everything, finally called the ISP, and they said that they would get hopefully everything back up and running by 8 p.m. Pacific, which it's now about 6 after 7 or 7 after 7. So, anyway, all I'm going to say is if you're on Facebook and watching, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to chat with you. If you want to chat with me, you got to head on over to Rumble, because that seems to be the only place that I am available right now. I really wish it weren't the case, but, it looks like the DNS issues are just having all kinds of problems. Well, maybe it'll work here. I'll check. But anyway, welcome to the program. We're a little late tonight, so I'm going to throw out the whole sponsorship thing. I'm going to take that out of the group, for now, but, let's go ahead and do, tonight's, on this day in American history. All right. And for tonight's On This Day in American History, we, of course, for all of our On This Day in American History, we always read from the American Patriots Almanac by William J. Bennett, John T.E. Cribb. They put together a fantastic book that is a montage, a collection of stories, factual evidence, factual stories, things like that, for every day of the year. And of course, several of my listeners enjoy this. Yeah, I'm just going to have to give up the Facebook part of things. So again, anyway, all right. So tonight is June 17th. I got that right. Okay, June 17th. Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes. June 17th, 1775, brought the first major battle of the Revolutionary War and one of its bloodiest. That morning, British General Thomas Gage, occupying Boston, woke up to discover that two hills across the Charles River were covered with Patriot troops and fortifications. New Englanders had spent all night furiously digging earthworks on Breed's Hill. Nearby Bunker Hill was dark with more American troops. Stung by the surprise, Gage determined to overwhelm the rebels. He ordered General William Howe to take the hills. Howe ferried his men across the river and, vowing never to order them to go where he was unwilling to lead, started them up the slope of Breed's Hill with drums pounding and fifes calling. On the crest of the hill, the nervous patriots eyed the advancing bayonets and fought off the impulse to let loose a quick volley before fleeing. "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes," came the order. Some say old Connecticut Indian fighter Israel Putnam barked it out. Others say it came from Colonel William Prescott of Massachusetts. It may well have come from both. They waited until the redcoats were fewer than 15 paces away before letting loose a ripping volley that left the hillside covered with bodies. The angry British retreated, attacked a second time, and again fell back. In blood-stained white silk breeches, Howe rallied his men and finally gained the crest. By that time, the Americans, who had run out of ammunition, were gone. British casualties were terrible, about half of their 2,000 men. Patriot losses were fewer, about 440 out of 3,200 defenders. Though driven back, the Americans had given the world's best-trained army something to think about. The Battle of Bunker Hill, so called even though the fighting actually took place on Breed's Hill, brought the Patriots much needed confidence. And that is today's On This Day in American History. Now, I'm going to tell you it's an interesting story, and I went to Boston one time as a kid, and basically heard about the Battle of Breed's Hill, or the Battle of Bunker Hill. And again, you've got to understand, the American patriots that fought against the world's greatest army of the time, they really, really, really had to have courage and honor and integrity for the most part, because those men knew that by, for an example, signing the Declaration of Independence, they were actually giving up their lives, their families, their livelihoods. They could be imprisoned. They could have been, obviously killed, tried, put to death, so on and so forth. But they did it anyway. They did it because they believed in our country. And these men were dads, some of them. These men were literally fathers and sons and part of family members that had come across to look to the new world for a new life and a new beginning and prosperity. And, when you think about things like this, especially on today's, this is Father's Day weekend. Tomorrow is Father's Day. Happy Father's Day to all of you fathers out there. I know I am a father, twice over. And it is the proudest title that I could ever have. Second comes close, but the second one is coach. But being a father means sometimes that you have to make the tough choices. You have to teach and, teach and discipline, and sometimes be the bad guy in the relationship. And so this is a day where, even if you don't really care for some of the things your father did, they didn't do it because of malice, more than likely. They did it because of their love for you. And I know there's several times that you know, I've, I don't want to say that I've sacrificed, but I mean, it kind of becomes that way. There's things that I do, and everything that I do is of course, for the family, for others, really. I mean, just about everything that I do. There's very little that I actually take for myself, I don't think. Of course, Mrs. Whiskey could probably correct me on that if she were going to. But the thing about it is that, fathers are actually unsung heroes in people's lives. Have you ever heard? It's very, very rare, but have you ever heard of an athlete who is standing up and giving a speech who basically says, I love my dad. My dad's greatest. He got me up and he took me to all my games and he took care of me and he washed my uniform and so on and so forth. No, it's usually mom that gets those accolades. And so fathers, generally speaking, tend to be the quiet, in the shadows kind of person. And that's okay, because we expect that. We expect to be the unsung heroes of everything, because most of the time in a kid's life, generally speaking, especially when you're dealing with a nuclear family concept and setup, most of the time in a child's life, dad gets up, goes to work, comes back home late, or whatever, and you generally don't see them unless you see them on potentially, at special events or something like that. But usually they're not necessarily involved on an everyday kind of basis. But believe me, we're there. Fathers are always there. And we're there to help pick you up when you feel down, to help brush you off, to teach you that falling down and failing is not a problem. But what is a problem is if you allow failure to defeat you, to stop you from reaching out and going after your dreams. Fathers are there to teach you how to handle the rough stuff. I mean, I can remember when my son was born, firstborn, and my Mrs. Whiskey about had a heart attack with this, but my son was, I don't know, maybe 6 months, 8 months old, possibly a year. I don't really remember exactly when, but dads go and they do the roughhousing thing, even with the baby. I mean, I had my son and I was like tossing him up in the air and, catching him, and he was just laughing and having a ball. And my wife, unfortunately, Mrs. Whiskey, as soon as, she'd see me let him go. And of course that, that motherly instinct takes over, and they want it. They're like, they panic, and you hear it in their you hear the, as you're doing this stuff. But you know what? Dads do those kinds of things. Dads do those kinds of things because that's what we do. That's how we can relate. And as my son got older and we started roughhousing and that kind of stuff, there were times that, he'd hit me or whatever. Here's an example. My son got into a biting kick where he was biting everything. I've told this story before. If you go back in the episodes, you'll hear it. But he went to go bite me on the arm. And I looked at him and I said, "Are you sure you want to do that? Because if you bite me, I'll bite you back." Sure enough, he bit me. And I went ahead and, true to my word, I bit him back. Now, people think, oh, you bit him back. Oh, you've got drew blood. No, I barely even left a mark. It was the shock, though, that I did it. That's what stopped him from biting anymore. And he actually quit. And it's stuff like that. It's things like getting an understanding of like the big dog, little dog syndrome. So like the big dog, the big dog is kind of like the enforcer, the one that that makes sure that everybody plays within the rules, because that's the role that dads take. And we let the little dogs kind of do their thing until it becomes a problem, and then dad has to step in. And that's what dads do. That's what dads do. You know, I had a biological father, and he was around until, till I was about 7 or 8. And then he and my mom got divorced. Grandma Whiskey, got divorced, and then he went off and did his thing. And, we'd see him every couple of years or whatever, he'd sweep us out for like a 2-week shindig. But growing up, I had a stepfather, and unfortunately he's passed. It's about 3 years now, I think. In fact, one of my episodes was actually talking about this, in particular after he had passed. But he and I had an interesting relationship, let's just say. There were times when I thought he was the biggest asshole in the world. And there's still days that there's times that I look back on things that he did, and let me tell you, he still ranks up there as being the biggest asshole in the world. But at the same time, though, he did teach me some things, taught me how to survive, taught me how to think on my feet, taught me how to do things. If I couldn't figure out how to do something, to basically work smart and not hard, figure things out, go through the whole, whatever task that you're on, learn how to do it yourself. And he did that. And unfortunately, in some cases, it's a little bit, my Mrs. Whiskey thinks it's a little negative, because at times she's like, you never ask for help. And the answer to that is, I usually don't need it. I'm not looking for it. But the thing about it is that he used to, whenever I would ask him for help, he would look at me and he would say, "What are you going to do when I'm gone? What if I wasn't here?" That was his response. What if I wasn't here? Seemed a little asshole-ish at the time, but I'm going to tell you, it made me into a resourceful and resilient individual. So there's times where your dad, if you're a young one and you're looking around and you're listening to this program, watching this program, there's going to be times where your dad is going to seem like the biggest asshole in the freaking world. But I'm going to tell you, they do it for a reason. Even if you can't see it today, I promise you, there will come a time where you're going to look and you're going to go, "Damn it, Dad was right." It's going to happen. I guarantee it. And so tomorrow is an important day. It is a very important day for the recognition of all the things that Dad does for you, seen and unseen. And so I've got a couple of articles, a couple things that I've talked about this in the past, but I've got a couple things here, some studies that have been done that I wanted to toss out towards you. But I'm getting nailed in the chat because I didn't say what I was drinking. So here's the deal. Tonight I am drinking the Four Roses bourbon. It is, I've got maybe 1/2 glass left in the bottle. So that's what I'm drinking. And of course, I am drinking it tonight in my We the People shot glass. There's the bullet on the side, and there's the We the People with the flag. You can kind of see it there. And of course, I'm drinking it straight with my whiskey stones. And so that's what we're doing. Gosh, I like that stuff. I think I'm becoming a bourbon person, really. I really think I am. I'm turning into a bourbon person. So we got things all messed up. Hey, if you want that shot glass, by the way, look up LuckyShotUSA.com. It's right here. LuckyShotUSA.com. And you can pick up that shot glass and a bunch of others. They got some really cool stuff. Really cool stuff for that. All right. Let's get into and of course I apologize if things are not going to quite work right, but we're going to give this a try here. All right. So I've got a couple of articles I stuck in there, but this is the first one, is the importance of fathers. Now, this is an old post. It is an old article, but it is still relevant today. Okay. And so this person, Dita M. Oliker, she's a PhD. That's like the same kind of PhD that Dr. Jill Biden, the greatest doctor of all time, is, but hers is the doctorate of education. This one here is actually I think she's a psychologist, but anyway. So in the article, she talks about the world, and I'm just going to read this to you here real quick. Oh, looks a little small on the screen, so let me open it up. Oops. I said I didn't, as I says, I didn't have a chance to like fully vet this. So hold on. All right. So, the world began to radically change with the social, economic, and technical advances of the 20th century. And with those changes came a basic change in the structure and function of the family, with a consequent shift in the authority of the father. His influence was increasingly seen as minor, even negligible, and his importance was defined by how well he provided for the family. Now, I'm not exactly sure I agree with this statement, realistically, but I mean, we can't deny the fact that, especially with those that are on government assistance, there is a push, and there was a push, historically speaking, there was a push to eliminate the father from the home. That and this is true, that back when welfare really got kicked off after FDR, he was pushing things. He was pushing things to where, especially the black community would have would push the father out. And the reason being is because they would be given more money on the government dime without the father being there. And of course, this is a big problem. I mean, this is a real big problem. But let's continue on with this article. She does continue on, and she says, there is no question that fathers do play an important part in their children's lives. The majority of studies affirm that an involved father can play a crucial role, particularly in the cognitive, behavioral, and general health and well-being areas of a child's life. Having a positive male role model helps an adolescent boy develop positive gender role characteristics. Adolescent girls are more likely to form positive opinions of men and are better able to relate to them when parented by an involved father. It is generally accepted under most circumstances that a father's presence and involvement can be as crucial to a child's healthy development as a mother's, and experiencing validation of their importance in the general parenting literature has made fathers much more conscious of their value, which in turn leads to their greater desire to be involved. Now, that's an interesting thing, because fathers, especially back, when I was young and growing up, fathers really got the short end of the stick in the courts. The mother usually just automatically was given custody of the children, and the father got the worst end of the stick. Even now, when we talk about the fight with the right to life with abortion, the father usually gets the short end of the stick in the conversation. And I don't know if you remember, but a buddy of mine, Steve Stiles, he and I get into this argument all the time because of the plain and simple fact that it takes two to make a baby. It takes a mother and it takes a father. And in my mind, the father also has a right to express his opinion on whether or not the mother of that child, whether or not they can get an abortion. Now, there are some proponents of abortion that fight and argue this and say it's not your body, it's not all you did was donate DNA. But I'm sorry, there's a lot more to it than just donating the DNA. And if you end up getting a individual, a man, who essentially comes in and, goes ahead and, wants to do right by his child that he has fathered, there's a lot of people who want to take that right away. I think that somebody like that you should absolutely celebrate. Because especially in today's day and age, how it's just love them and leave them and drop them on the curb and, who cares kind of mentality. We need to celebrate fathers. We need to celebrate their contributions. We need to celebrate the men who stand up and want to take care of their children, who want to be a part of these kids' lives. And I know that in my growing up and also my fatherhood period, I still got one left in the house, although she's getting close to going on her own way here pretty soon. But I know with my duties as a father and everything, I wasn't always there. But I would always try. I would make an attempt to do everything that I could to be there for my children. Even though other responsibilities would sometimes take precedence. And there are times where I do have regrets for what happened. But the fact of the matter is that's the kind of life that everything needs to happen. So anyway, there's another article too that I wanted to bring up, and I do this. I keep these articles around, these two articles in particular, because of the importance that they communicate about fathers. So this second one is also from. Oh well, this one's actually much more recent. It was updated when I took it. It was updated May 11th of 2021, and this is The Science of Dad and the Father Effect. And this is, the subtitle says, there are data-driven reasons why kids do better with a father figure in their lives. This is by Joshua Kirsch. Both of these, by the way, are in the show notes. But here's the quote. So far, we know that kids who grow up with a present engaged dad are less likely to drop out of school or wind up in jail compared to children with absent fathers and no other male caretakers or role models. When children have close relationships with father figures, now keep in mind, this isn't always biological dads. This is a father type figure. Could be a grandfather, could be a very close friend or neighbor, could be a coach also. But it continues here. Sorry. When children have close relationships with father figures, they tend to avoid high-risk behaviors, and they're less likely to have sex at a young age. They're more likely to have high-paying jobs and healthy, stable relationships when they grow up. They also tend to have higher IQ test scores by the age of 3 and endure fewer psychological problems throughout their lives when fatherhood is taken seriously. Now, just think about that for a second. An engaged dad is less likely to have a child drop out of school or wind up in jail. Now, this study further cements the idea that the nuclear family with a father and a mother in the home, or somewhat of a nuclear type of relationship somewhere, is proven, scientifically proven, And this isn't the only study that does this. I mean, it's scientifically proven to show that the child grows up much better adjusted for life than those without a parent, a father figure, or a father parent in the home. Now, we're just talking about fathers here. We're not talking about mothers, but the thing about it is, though, is that this even goes so far, like all these mass shootings. Everybody talks about the mass shooters. Okay, everybody talks about mass shooters and stuff. All of the mass shooters, or many of them, the majority of them, actually have come from broken homes. But yet that statistic is not transmitted by the mainstream media or even talked about. It's true, though. All right, so the next image that we have here is also from the piece. The father effect is the umbrella term for the benefits of a paternal presence. Of course, a father's active participation in the family is always preferred. There needs to be a minimum amount of time spent together, but the quality of time is more important than the quantity of time. This gentleman, his name's Amato. He's one of the researchers, I think. Amato says, just watching television together, for example, isn't going to help much. So in other words, what he's trying to say is, for the fathers who get engaged with their children, play with them, build things, do activities, get together in terms of scouting, go camping, fishing, hunting, do guy things with your kids. And it doesn't even have to be, honestly, it doesn't even have to be a son for that. Okay. It can even be a daughter that you do these things with. It's just the fact that you get engaged, and it's not just sitting around and watching the TV. Maybe you play an interactive game. Maybe you play some games with them, board games, card games, whatever it is. You read a book together, you do something. I mean, with my daughter, I used to do tea parties and occasionally she would mess with my hair a little bit. I've had my fingernails painted before. I'm not afraid to say it. In fact, one time I even pulled out my camo kit from my hunting kit and I had her put the camo on my face. It was a version of makeup, let's just say. But it's all those kinds of things that go into the well-balanced development of a child. And sometimes it is completely overlooked. I know it's way overlooked by the Democrats and the mainstream media because all they want to do is destroy the nuclear family. They just want to get rid of the nuclear family. That isn't the case. There's plenty of scientific evidence that basically shows that a nuclear family provides benefits for children and their upbringing and their well-being and healthy development. Okay? So, here's the let's see, I think this is the last one, but let me see. Here's some more from the piece. Before we dive into how involved fathers help their kids and how uninvolved fathers harm them, it is important to highlight what an engaged, active, involved father looks like. First of all, as ever, showing up is half the battle. Dads who live with their kids and take time out of their days to attend important events are far more likely to have a positive impact than absent fathers. Just show up and be there. One of the things that I would do with my kids, and I did it recently here. My daughter does dance. She dances competitively. And I don't always get to go and see the dances live because oftentimes there's some travel involved and I've got other responsibilities, things that I can't take a break from. But technology has helped me out by allowing the events to stream. And so I will make it a point to do my best to watch the streams and text when I see things, and how I feel that the performance went, to try and stay engaged with my daughter in particular. Now, granted, it's not the most ideal situation. I understand that, but even doing something like that, being engaged from afar, can do much more than just being completely absent. So, that's the type of things that we need to advocate for. We need to push. Yeah. So that's the end of the screenshots for right now. We need to advocate for that. And speaking of advocating for fatherhood, there's a video, Denzel Washington, I'm just going to put it out here. Denzel Washington is a phenomenal actor, but I actually think that he is more than just an actor. His impact on children, he goes and he speaks at universities, he speaks at high schools, he's helped out acting classes and things like that. He has gone and spoken, to the youth of America, and he doesn't hide his belief in God. He doesn't hide his belief in hard work. He does not hide his belief in, failure as a part of success. And he does this on a consistent basis. But one of the things I was struck with was he did an interview a while back, when his movie, I can't think of the name of the movie. But it's a movie where a father has to go and do a legal battle to either get his kids or do something with his kids. I can't remember what it was. But anyway, he was being interviewed for this, and I'd like to play. I've played it before, but I'd like to play. I'd like to play his comments, his excerpt, as a part of this interview. So if you'll bear with me, let me go ahead and bring that up here.
Think we've made any headway?
I think it's more important to make headway in our own house. By the time the system comes into play, the damage is done. They're not locking up 7-year-olds.
Yeah.
I was in Chicago a couple of 3-4 weeks ago, and we saw these little kids on bikes with masks on the side of their head, like 5 or 6 of them. And the driver said, yeah, they're little yummies. I said, who? He said, little yummies. Look up, Google Little Yummy. Little Yummy was an 11-year-old murderer.
Wow.
And you look at his picture, you'll see the headshot of him, and he's like this. And he got murdered at 11 by a 14-year-old.
Wow.
Who's doing life now, and a 16-year-old.
It makes no sense.
You blame the system? Where was his father? Yeah. It starts in the house. It starts in the home. And well, my father got locked up. Well, where was his father?
Yeah.
Like I did talk about my 3 closest friends, and they did, 15 to 25. One did 28, this and that. I was the only one of the 3 that had a father in my life, even though my parents were together. But I still had a father who was a gentle man and a good example. Yeah. And they didn't. We can blame the system if we want, but they didn't lock any of us up at 7.
Yeah.
We were all doing enough to get locked up at 13. My parents sent me in another direction. They didn't have anybody to help them, and they kept doing what they was doing, and the system got them. So I don't, the system is rigged, but why? All the more reason not to help it.
And I know that he kind of makes that comment at the end where the system is rigged. You depending upon what side of the aisle you sit on, you could say that yes, it is. But at the same time, though, you need to understand that it's the things that you do ahead of that, before the system gets a hold of somebody, that is really important. And that's the point that I think he was making. But still, the thing about it is that fathers need to be engaged. They need to be around. They need to be as much as possible. I understand there are priorities, there are things that need to happen, but when you have a child, you need to take responsibility for that child. And unfortunately, in today's day and age, responsibility, accountability, those are things that are few and far between. So I'm going to be honest with you, ladies out there, if you are within the sound of my voice and you happen to have a man, you may not like him. You may have been divorced from him, but if that man is attempting to do what is right by his children and be involved, don't stand in their way. Give them the opportunity to do this, because by stopping them from trying to be a part of a person's life, now, keep in mind, this is for the good guys, not necessarily the ones that are, doing negative things, but the good guys. Don't let your personal feelings of the man be the only thing, because they still can have a positive influence on the children. Those are their kids. Give them a chance. I know that, I miss my stepfather. There's times where I'll hear or see or do something that reminds me of him. And, even though, like I said, there's a lot of times where he was a real ass to me, to my mother. But ultimately he did some good, and that's what I'm going to remember, of him. I'm not going to necessarily remember the bad. I'll be mindful of it, but I'm not going to necessarily remember it. Anyway, so if you get the opportunity, if your father is here, whether you like him or not, whether you've been estranged from them or whatever, may not be a bad idea to go and say, give him a call, at least reach out to him, say hello. Sometimes it's just the little things that count. It's just the little things that count. May not necessarily be, life changing or life altering, but it's the effort that makes the difference. It's the effort that makes the difference for the kids, and it's the effort that makes the difference for the adults. And I will always advocate for that. All right. Okay. Let's move on just a little bit here, into our next topic, into the, sorry, total dichotomy. We're shifting gears and we're going from right to left right now, because we're going to be talking about the most interesting father in the White House. All right, okay, we'll take a shift here, complete shift, crash and burn into the next thing, which is, let's talk about Biden. All right, so the Federalist came out with with some information with regards to everything that we know about the Biden bribery scheme from the FBI document. And so here's some of the things that they are highlighting. Obviously, the first thing, which I get into this with people on social media all the time, it's like, oh, that it's just hearsay. No, it's not. The confidential human source that is named in the FBI's 1023 document is reportedly highly credible, meaning that they have provided the FBI with information in the past that has panned out. I mean, you don't get to be a highly credible source by this being your first time providing evidence to the FBI. Usually what has to happen is you have to provide them with something that is verifiable. And sometimes some of these information or these sources, confidential human sources, can actually go years with providing information to the FBI. And so, Yeah, this is a confidential human source. So why the FBI didn't bother to follow up on this is completely lost. But apparently, according to something that Chairman Comer found out, he says, quote, the confidential human source who provided the information about then Vice President Biden being involved in a criminal bribery scheme is a trusted, highly credible informant who has been used by the FBI for over 10 years and has been paid over 6 figures. That is not a hearsay thing. Okay. All right. So alleged allegations of this date back all the way to 2017. So yeah, it's essentially, this is going all the way back. The information related in the document goes all the way back to 2017. So that prompted agents to re-interview the confidential human source and uncover details about the Burisma bribery scandal, which resulted, of course, in the 1023 that was dated June 30th of 2020. Now, Biden's allegedly took $10 million from the Burisma executive. So 2 payments, that's what they say, $5 million each. And then, so it's a total of $10 million. And then, of course, we also know that from Grassley that there are actual tapes from the Burisma executive who paid this. He has tapes, 17 recordings in total, for this, 15 between the Burisma executive and Hunter Biden, and then another 2 that are reportedly between Zlochevsky and then Vice President Biden, for 17 in total. And Zlochevsky kept the tapes as sort of an insurance policy, and noted that the form also suggested then Vice President Joe Biden may have been involved in Burisma employing Hunter Biden. I thought Joe didn't know about his stuff. So anyway, AG Barr. Now, we all know Bill Barr has been talking about how, all of this stuff coming out on Trump is damning and everything else. But yeah, AG Barr apparently referred that investigation to Delaware because, Raskin, Democrat ranking member Jamie Raskin, who, I think he's kind of despicable. The cancer aside, I mean, the guy's done, his health has been bad in the past. I think he's beating it. But outside of that, he's basically come out and been like, yeah, he's been dismissing it and so on and so forth. In his statement, he said in August 2020, Attorney General Barr and his hand-picked U.S. attorney signed off on closing the assessment. Well, apparently in an exclusive interview with the Federalist, the former Attorney General actually debunked it and said, on the contrary, this is Bill Barr, on the contrary, it was sent to Delaware for further investigation. So anyway, the point being is that, yeah, this is going to be a big, big problem. Now, keep in mind, this all came from the laptop. Okay. And a couple other things came out from Breitbart. Now Breitbart is saying that there's another source that is saying that the Bidens allegedly coerced the Burisma executive to pay the $10 million. According to Chuck Grassley about the audio tapes, a source, talking about them being the insurance policy, well, a source with knowledge of the FBI's informant document told Breitbart News the Bidens not only asked for the alleged bribe, but coerced Zlochevsky into allegedly paying them. Now, this makes it even worse because they actually coerced him to pay them the money. Now, let me see here. Yeah. So Zolchevsky allegedly told the confidential human source that he was dismayed by Trump's victory, fearing an investigation would reveal his payments to the Biden family, which included a $5 million payment to Hunter and a $5 million payment to Joe. According to the confidential human source, the Burisma executive bemoaned the situation, claiming the Bidens had coerced him into paying the bribes. Now, the funny thing is, if you've been watching Dan Bongino the last couple of days, Dan Bongino has tapes that have been played by the mainstream media in the past, but has tapes where they are talking about, where Joe is talking about shutting down the major bank, Privat Bank, and trying to shut it down just in case Trump starts digging into the whole Ukraine Privat Bank situation. And that Joe says that it would probably not be good for Ukraine to continue to ask Trump for money, because what that's going to do is make Trump go and investigate and figure out what's going on. And Joe did not want Trump to know or dig into it. So come on, folks. I'm sorry. This is just, I mean, this should really, there shouldn't even be any question. He should automatically be being impeached on this. He literally should. There's just no way, no two ways about it. This guy and his family are just corrupt as hell. And apparently a former business partner, Devin Archer, is in talks to testify to Congress about the Biden's alleged Ukraine bribe. Hunter Biden's former business partner, Devin Archer, is in talks to comply with the House Oversight Committee's subpoena regarding his knowledge of the Biden family's alleged $10 million Ukraine bribe and additional family business transactions. So, yeah. It's going to be kind of interesting to see. I honestly, again, I'm just going to be, perfectly frank. I don't think, especially with our current DOJ, I honestly do not believe that we are going to see anything legal done about this, especially under this administration. But hopefully soon. I will say that there are a couple people, Lauren Boebert, for an example, that has filed impeachment papers. I don't recall off the top of my head who they are for. I think they're for Joe Biden, but I mean, if they even get through the House, let's just assume that they get through the House. They have to go through the Senate in order to remove him. So I highly doubt that's going to happen. And I especially highly doubt that it's going to happen prior to the 2024 election. But I can tell you this much, that no matter what happens, it's stuff like this that will be damaging to Joe Biden outside of his political base, outside of the Kool-Aid drinking sycophants that are out there, with their noses so far up Biden's butt, he's getting his prostate tickled. Outside of those people, we just may get some movement in the political front for that. All right. So I don't know if anybody, shifting gears here, I don't know if anybody noticed, but I am advocating for the entire month of June. For the entire month of June, I am advocating that on social media, you post once a day the hashtag American Pride Month and post a picture or a GIF of the American flag. And the reason for this, of course, is for us to kind of push back on this very wildly unpopular agenda. Speaking of wildly unpopular, this article in Just the News came out, and there are concerns, this is the headlines, concerns that transgender culture has gone too far, make for an unusual Pride Month. And apparently there was a middle school student in Massachusetts. I think I talked about this last time, that they protested against being told to celebrate it. Also, I don't know if anybody noticed, but there were some pictures that came out that apparently the Dodgers in their stadium, in their pride celebration, where they brought in the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, which is a complete affront to the Catholic religion. But apparently during that show, there was only about 500 people in attendance, that there was a grassroots blockade outside the stadium that kept people from making it to the stadium. And there's pictures of a completely empty stadium with these people doing their show. And I guess it really distressed them, and it distressed the group, the sisters of whatever. Yeah, anyway, so we're fighting back, folks. People are getting tired of having this shoved down their throats, and it's actually happening. I mean, Anheuser-Busch, Bud Light, their brand got knocked off the pedestal of being the #1 beer brand for many, many years, and they got knocked out by Modelo. And that was put out. And so people are getting tired of this. There was even some conversations with regards to Starbucks and some of their unions saying that managers were being told to take down Pride Month displays. And there are some witnesses that are saying that they've actually been muted more so than what they have been in the past. And so, folks, we're winning. We just got to keep it up. We have got to keep this up. And it has nothing to do, regardless of what anybody thinks, I'm just going to tell you this right now. It has nothing to do with whether you want to be gay or lesbian or, transgender or whatever. That's not the problem. You go, live your life, do what you're going to do. Okay. We just don't need to hear about it. I don't need to hear about your sexual fantasies or what you choose to do. I don't need to see a parade with you naked and like showing off all of your wares in front of kids. Okay. This is what people are upset about. And it has nothing to do with your life, but it has everything to do with everybody else's. Now, as I've pointed out before, I am of the type where, hey, you know what? You live your life, you do your thing. As long as you leave me alone, as long as what I do doesn't affect you and what you do doesn't affect me, we're copacetic. And that's how life is supposed to be, especially here in America. That's called freedom. But unfortunately, the transgender and LGBTQ movements have pushed it to where there's places like you can't even, let's say for an example, this past weekend, let's say for an example that the White House put up a Christian flag instead of the LGBTQ flag, but put up a Christian flag in between the United States flags. Now, most people probably wouldn't argue it, okay, because we are fundamentally a Judeo-Christian nation. But the fact of the matter is that there would be people that would be arguing against it and saying that it was an establishment of a religion. I talked about this on my last episode. This is no longer just a group of people wanting to not be marginalized. I still can't figure out, and I haven't been told, what rights these people have or don't have in comparison to straight people. Because again, your basic rights apply to everybody. And I have yet to have anybody actually give me the right, do they have the right to do something that I can't? Well, actually, they do have the right to do something that I can't. Because if I were to go and strip naked and run down the street, even today, I would be arrested for lewd and indecent exposure. Do it in a pride parade and it's all okay. So, yeah. Anyway. All right. For those of you who are extremely interested, all right, they have, even though I already knew this and I've talked about this on this program, but they now have, I guess, information. I don't know where they got this stuff really, but here from the Washington Examiner, COVID, the Chinese military had deep ties to the Wuhan lab suspected of the COVID-19 outbreak, cables show. No shit. I'm sorry, folks, but you're just now getting to this. I'm telling you, my theory on COVID is that they were doing experiments in gain of function research to try and create a bioweapon that was going to be used on somebody. My guess is that due to the Chinese makeup of their people and how much they were having problems with money and everything, I have a feeling that what they were going to do is release it on their own people, but it got loose. And if you and my theory is only supported by the idea that if you look at how the virus spread and who it attacked, that only seems to make sense that they engineered it that way. It really was focused on people who were either aging or indigent, had like serious health problems. Most people who didn't have health issues, generally speaking, yeah, it was a bad cold, but they survived it, whether they had a shot or not. Whether they, they didn't get intubated necessarily. They generally, for the most part, survived it pretty well. So if you look at that in the historical data and you look at the historical levels that this virus actually attacked, the original, not the mutation, but the original, it stands to reason that it was potentially designed to be a specific targeted attack for a certain segment or subsegment of the population. Well, apparently the Chinese military now have deep ties to that Wuhan lab. And also, I don't know if you saw, but there was another article that came out that the very first patient zeros were doctors that actually worked at the lab, that actually worked at Wuhan. So don't tell me that this thing wasn't engineered and it wasn't being done at that lab and didn't center around that lab. There's just no two ways about it. You cannot avoid that. I'm just telling you that is the most likely explanation, and it's the right one. But anyway, newly unearthed State Department cables showed the United States government's early concerns about the deep ties and research collaboration between the Wuhan lab and the Chinese military amid the search for COVID-19's origins. The heavily redacted cables, which warned about the connections between the Wuhan Institute of Virology and the People's Liberation Army in the summer of 2020, were obtained by U.S. Right to Know through the Freedom of Information Act and appear to be based on information analyzed from the American Institute in Taiwan, which is essentially the U.S.'s unofficial embassy in Taiwan. The three cables seem to have originally been classified secret, but that had crossed out and replaced with sensitive instead. The cables touch on the Chinese Communist Party's military-civil infusion program pushed by Chinese leader Xi Jinping. The trio of cables also mentioned links to the Wuhan lab mentioned the links the Wuhan lab had with the Chinese Academy of Sciences and the Academy of Military Medical Sciences, the PLA Institute for Chemical Defense, and the Central Military Commission-founded Wuhan Institute of Biological Projects, and China's high-tech R&D 863 program. So in other words, heavily influenced by military and defense, assuming, spending. So the Wuhan Institute of Virology has long been suspected as the source of the global pandemic that killed more than 1 million Americans. And these new cables shine a spotlight into the State Department's efforts in the height of the outbreak to understand the role the lab played and its secret ties to the Chinese military. Yeah. So you take this information, you add that to the fact that the Wuhan Institute had to get emergency upgrades to their systems. Yeah. So on and so forth. I mean, it's just, yeah. I'm sorry. This is just why we don't consider China a enemy of the world and cut them off from everything because they released this damn thing. Even if it was a mistake, it still got released. Is beyond me. Honestly, I just don't understand it. I just don't get it. Speaking of not understanding things, our U.S. national debt hits an all-time high of $32 trillion. Well, this is actually pretty simple to understand. The federal government keeps wanting to spend money. Spend. And it comes less than 2 weeks after Biden signed the debt ceiling bill. Yeah. We are, our children's children are going to be paying this crap back. That debt ceiling bill, that debt ceiling BS bill that got signed, that did nothing for the American people. And I'm sorry, but Biden keeps talking about taxes are not going to increase for those over 400,000. It's going to have to. It's going to have to happen. I'm sorry. It just is. It's just going to have to happen. There's just no way that we can be able to, even with our current tax load, the American government would have to stop spending, period, for us to be able to catch up on this. And it would probably take us anywhere from 10 to 20 years just to catch up to a $32 trillion debt. It's just no way. This is crazy. And, they keep blaming Trump for the increase in the debt. And yes, he does take some blame for this. Okay. He does take some blame, but the reality of it is that Joe Biden just pushed more and more spending on top of the stuff that Trump did, which, by the way, was mostly at the end when COVID hit. So at the urging of a Democrat Congress, by the way. They don't say that, though. All right. Let's get on to tonight's questions for whiskey. And yes, I was pausing because I wasn't sure which button I had to push for that. I don't have my cheat sheet up. But anyway, tonight's question comes from Buddy, and I know that Buddy has left the building for this, but he says, "Hey, Whiskey, please tell us about the state of Washington. I know very little about your state of residence." Okay, so what can I tell you about the state of Washington other than the fact that it is currently a liberal crap hole? No. Okay. So as I don't know if anybody has ever said this, but Washington, in my mind, is one of the prettiest states in the union. Okay. We have, as far as like an ecological standpoint, we have such a diverse set of ecology and environments within our state's borders. On the west side of the mountains, you get most of the rain. You get it isn't a lot of snow. We do get some snow, but not a lot in terms of the winter. For the most part, when it's kind of normal. But then we have our mountain range, which is the Cascade Range, and that it roughly divides the state geographically in kind of a 1/3, 2/3 scenario, where 1/3 lies west of the mountain range and 2/3 lie east. Now, the thing about it is everything on the east side of the mountains is actually more of like a high plains desert type of environment. So many days of sunshine, and we have a wine production area in the Columbia Basin that can rival some of the California wines that are out there. So if you haven't tried like a Columbia Valley wine or a, Kyle, I'm just trying to think. That's one that I think of right off the top of my head. I'm not much of a wine drinker, but if you haven't tried a Washington wine, you should probably give it a try. And we do everything from Rieslings to Merlots to Pinot Grigios, Pinot Noirs, Cabernets, all of them. Okay. And what I really appreciate about it is the fact that I can spend just 2 hours in a car where I am at, where I live. I can spend just 2 hours in a car and I can go from the mountains down to the beaches on the Pacific Ocean very, very quickly. And it's a very diverse environment. We actually even have, believe it or not, we have a rainforest too, over out on the peninsula on the west side, over in the Olympic Mountains, which is our western mountain range. They actually have a rainforest called the Hoh Rainforest. But one of the things that we are fairly known for, of course, is the city of Seattle. That is a very common place for people to go. Now, this image that I'm showing right now is an image of downtown being taken from, let's see, the angle that we're at. Oh, we're on the north, kind of on the north side. We're looking southbound. And as you can see in the image, there's a mountain in the background on the right-hand side of the image. That mountain is our tallest mountain at like 14,500 feet. That's Mount Rainier. For those of you that don't know, well, maybe you don't know, but you've probably heard the last volcano that has erupted within the continental United States happened on May 18th, 1980. That's Mount St. Helens in southwest Washington. And Mount St. Helens is part of the Cascade chain, which Rainier is a part of. The other thing that kind of sets Washington apart in terms of Seattle itself is the Space Needle. Now, the Space Needle was put in, it is, they built it for the World's Fair, and it's got a restaurant at the top that when you go up there, it physically rotates once per hour. So you can see the vista views that are all around. Now, as far as like our climate and everything is concerned, we really don't get too hot and we really don't get too cold. Generally speaking, we only have maybe about 3 weeks to a month worth of really hot weather. That typically happens in August. I always jokingly say that the 4th of July is like when the furnace gets kicked on, because typically our 4th of July will be covered in clouds, and then the next day and subsequent days after that, the temperature starts rising and we end up in our summertime. We also will have like an Indian summer in September, and sometimes extending into October, where winter doesn't actually start hitting us until November. But believe me, in November, it does come through. Now, outside of the weather, most of the people who live here live a very active lifestyle. There are a lot of outdoor enthusiasts here, whether it's fishing, hiking, camping, and some hunting. There is a lot to do if you are an outdoor enthusiast. And of course, the weather being as generally temperate as what it is, albeit wet in most cases, allows for a lot of people to be able to go and enjoy the outdoors. In terms of arts and things like that, we do have a very big art scene. I don't know if you remember the 80s and 90s. The band Nirvana came from here. Temple of the Dog came from here. It was the whole grunge scene centered out of Seattle. So there's a lot of people who are extremely, interested in that. We also have a lot of water, so boating is fantastic here. There's a lot of people who enjoy boating, and you can not only boat in terms of the lakes that are around here, but you also have the Puget Sound, which is not quite being on the ocean, but you can still see things like orca whales and sometimes gray whales traversing the Puget Sound. So there's stuff that you can do there as well. The environment is just great. Now, that being said, I'm going to tell you right now, if you do come here, don't go to Seattle. Seattle has had some serious problems with drugs and, of course, the defund the police movement. And this is, of course, the biggest downfall with Washington is the fact that the western side is completely overrode with Democrats. And their voting practices, if you think California is bad, just wait, because Washington will follow and Oregon will also follow right beyond it or right behind it. So California will think of something, and then all of a sudden, Oregon will be like, yeah, that sounds like a really good idea. And then next thing you know, Washington will do it. Or vice versa. Washington will do it first, and then Oregon will be like, I don't want to be the odd man out, and go ahead and pick it up. So outside of the politics, though, I mean, the people are generally nice for the most part, even though they are, diametrically opposed in some cases to me. But the people in general are fairly nice. And any place outside of the cities, I feel are much better than the cities. But then again, I'm kind of a rural person, so that's just the way that I rock and roll. There's plenty of folklore around here about Bigfoot, Sasquatch, that kind of thing. In fact, technically, there are places surrounding Mount Rainier and part of some of our national forests that we have here that have never actually seen a human foot. They may have been photographed from the air. They may have been, taken care of by satellite, but there are some places even today that are have reportedly never been explored. So it's a fascinating state. You can do all kinds of things. The Columbia River separates us, which is our largest river. It separates us from Oregon and is a big, huge shipping channel for the eastern side. And so, again, there's a lot of things to do. It's a great place to live. The taxes kind of suck, but that's just the way it goes with Democrats. And unfortunately, the Democrat strongholds of Seattle, Tacoma, and Olympia, which are three cities that are within about half an hour to 45 minutes of each other, they have a stranglehold on this state. And that's part of the reason why I really would have appreciated the state being set up with some sort of an electoral college. But anyway, so I don't know if that answers your question necessarily. Obviously, the state was named after General George Washington, the first president of our country. But yeah, it's anyway. And yes, most border states, you're right, Coco Dominki, most border states to Canada have seen Sasquatch sightings, and we've had our share. I mean, we've had our share. Now where I'm at is I'm about an hour or so away from the Canadian border into British Columbia, Canada, Vancouver to be exact. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a great place. I think it's a great place to live. A lot of people have problems with the constant rain. The funny joke is that if you somebody is from Seattle or Washington area if they can describe rain in more than 5 adjectives. For us, there's other places in the States that get technically more rain than what we do on a per inch basis. But because ours is stretched out for close to 9 months, that we get the distinct designation of being a rainy place. And granted, that's true on the west side of the mountains. On the east side, not so much. So I always tell people that if you come here to go to Seattle or something, just don't necessarily think of Washington as what Seattle looks like. because there's a whole 2/3 of the state on the east side of the mountains. Spokane, Washington is a great little city, over on the east side, just inside the eastern border. Yeah, there's plenty to do. To me, it's a fantastic state. I would love to stay here if I could, but I have a feeling that the politics are going to push me out eventually. So anyway, so there you go. There's the answer to the question. Do me a favor. And hey, as you noticed, that wasn't a political question or a history question. So I'm obviously open to answering questions of all types and shapes and sizes. If you want to go ahead and give me a question, please do so at fans, F-A-N-S, that's fans at whiskeymusings.online. Fans at whiskeymusings.online, and I'll get it in for my Saturday questions for whiskey at the end of the program. That is my final Whiskey Musings thought. Do me a favor, if you appreciate the program, head on over to Rumble, sign up for a free account, and hit the follow button on my channel on the Whiskey Musings Broadcast. Don't forget, I also have another channel, the Constitutional Quarter, which I have to get that video, last Wednesday's video, up. But you can go and take a look at that. And also be sure to wish your father a happy Father's Day and just let him know how much he means to you and what he's done for you. I'm sure that he would appreciate that. We'll see you next time, next Wednesday, on the Whiskey Musings Broadcast. Good night, everybody.
The Whiskey Musings Broadcast is produced by Active Eye Media, LLC. All rights reserved.